In the New Testament, the physical appearance of Jesus Christ is never mentioned or described. Early Christians thus took it upon themselves to give Jesus an appearance. What is interesting is how the original depictions undergo changes and evolve into something completely different, which then becomes the universal image of Jesus Christ. These 3 rooms of exhibit will not only show the development of this image from the pagan-based imagery, but explain why the changes occurred and remain to this day. Room 1 of the exhibit shows the earliest depiction of Jesus during the 3rd and 4th centuries. Always young-looking, clean-shaven, Greco-Roman with a toga, Jesus is recognizable in most cases due to the context of the imagery. In the Dura Europos baptistry, it is clear that the image of the Good Shepherd is Jesus, not the pagan shepherd god Orpheus, since the place is Christian. Jesus is recognizable when the image can be related to a story from the New Testament, such as Jesus healing the paralytic and Jesus with the Samaritan woman. At times, to identify Jesus, the chiron with the Alpha and Omega is placed around his head for when Jesus said, "I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end." Such is the imagery of Christ at the San Gennaro catacombs in Naples. Jesus as the philosopher is a look that comes from Demosthenes, the famous Greek orator who gave speeches on issues of this time. Demosthenes is given a specific wise appearance which is adapted to portray the wisdom of Jesus, the teacher, as seen on the sarcophagus of Janneus Bassus. Room 2 of the exhibit concentrates on the well-known image of the bearded Jesus. One of the earliest bearded Jesus in a non-narrative context is found in the catacombs of Comodilla as a central ceiling fresco. This new image of Christ begins to appear after the Edict of Milan in 313 in the East. The portrayal makes its way to Italy to demonstrate a more mature Jesus approaching the end of his life and in the stories leading to his passion. For example, the mosaic of Judas's kiss from the church of Sant'Apollinare Nuove in Ravenna. This representation of Christ becomes more evident in 544 in the kingdom of Edessa. At this time, the imagery begins to be based on the image of Christ from the Shroud of Turin. Now, the first known owner of the Shroud of Turin is in the year 1355, and there has been a carbon-14 test which indicates that the shroud was created in the 14th century. However, the art surfacing before this time comes to show that the shroud was discovered and existed before then. Some of the characteristics that isolate these images include the long narrow face, the wide eyes, long wavy hair, the hole in the beard under the small lips, the lines beside the eyebrows, the forehead crease, the asymmetrical mustache, and sometimes the 2 short hairs at the top of the forehead. One of the depictions of Jesus with the most resemblance to the shroud is the Christ Pantocrator at the St. Catherine's Monastery, with 250 points of congruence visible when superposed in polarized light with the shroud. Other examples are on the gold stylus of Justinian II and on a fresco painting in the catacombs of Pontianus. Dating from the 12th century, the Prayer Codex intensively challenges the authority of the carbon-14 test. Some aspects identical to the shroud on the manuscript are the position of Jesus, the 4 fingers shown on each hand due to the nailing, the forehead trickle of blood, the sheet pattern from the herringbone cloth of the shroud, and the L-shaped burn holes in the sheet. Still, for those who doubt the authenticity of the Shroud of Turin, it is evident that based on the specific iconography of Jesus, one can see that the shroud influenced the now universal depiction of Jesus Christ. Room 3 of the exhibit focuses strictly on the evolution of the Christian depictions of the crucified Christ. On the sarcophagus of Domitilla from the 4th century, the crucifixion is not shown, since death through crucifixion was the highest form of humiliation, especially for their Lord. Hence, placing the empty cross with a triumphal wreath and sleeping soldiers implies the glorious resurrection. In the 5th century, the crucified Christ begins to appear either triumphantly or with his humiliating cross hidden. These imageries show that even in the worst death, Jesus was still glorious and strong. In the late 6th century, the first portrayal of the crucifixion in an illuminated manuscript appears in the Rabula Gospels, where Jesus is suffering and bleeding with his victory through his purple and gold robe. Here, Jesus is still alive. Much closer to the crucifix seen today is the Gero cross during the 10th century Germany, where Jesus is shown dead for the completion of the ultimate sacrifice, yet with a gold and bejeweled halo for his glory. Finally, in the 14th century comes the bloody and suffering Christ in the Holcomb Bible. As seen on the Shroud of Turin, Jesus has many dot marks on his body from the cruel lashing. In this intense suffering imagery, the defeat of death is demonstrated through the skull faces under the crucifix. From there, Jesus continues to be shown as the man of sorrows, a man not just as a triumphant king of heaven, but also as a man who endured terrible agonies for the salvation of the world.